I'm so excited. Today I'm going to be sharing a really simple mindful mandala drawing practice, and it's very simple. It can be done in just a handful of minutes, and what I love about it is that it's accessible for everybody. So you don't need to be an artist or have a drawing practice. It's really a tool. I consider it a container similar to that circle. It's a container that can hold us and hold our thoughts and our emotions, and it's really a beautiful way to de-stress. If you have a cup or something that you can trace a circle, that's perfect. So this is just an example. We're going to do a bit of a warm-up drawing practice before we start making the actual mandala together. And so this is an example of several different ways that we're going to be making marks on the page. And this is one that I've done. You can see here is another one. And I'm just showing this to give you an idea of different marks that you can make. So you can notice some of these marks have hard lines or edges. Some are more organic and flowing. You might see lines or dots. So there's really, again, no right or wrong way. We're going to just explore making some shapes. And what I love about this practice also is that it can be however you're feeling in the moment. So you might notice that that will change over time. So this is where we want to get. So if you want to start making some circles using either just by hand or with what you have to trace it, while you do that, I'm going to show just a couple of examples about the mindful mandala drawings that you can just kind of peek up and look at as you're making circles, and then we'll start in just a moment. So some of these you'll notice have color, and again, you don't have to have color today. I recommend just using a Sharpie. You can always go back and fill in with color later. And what I love about this is typically the circles are really small, anywhere from a few inches big, maybe up to 6 inches large. And again, it's that container. And so we'll be exploring different ways to dive into that container. So with this drawing practice, I mentioned that there is a follow-up writing practice that we'll be doing as well. But I just want to show examples of how some of these lines are really thin, some are thicker and colored in, some actually have color. You'll notice some have a lot of space in the circle, so you don't have to fill everything in if you don't want to. Again, there's different shapes like triangles, dots, circles, etc. We will get started. Hopefully you have some circles on your page. I just want to, in this first one here, perhaps start making marks that are tuned into your breath. So you might notice your breathing right now, if it feels shallow or deep or fast or slow. And I just want to encourage you to start making marks that might symbolize or show how your breath is in this moment. So one thing I like to do is it's almost like a heart monitor, those heart monitor machines that show your pulse going up and down. So you can see I'm just making lines with my breathing. What is my breathing doing right now? So on the inhale, perhaps that line is going up, and on the exhale, that line is coming back down. And you don't have to try to force or change your breath. This is really just a visual way to capture what you're feeling. It's a way to tune into your body. It's a way to start connecting to the page and the paper. It's also a way you can start to notice the sound of your breath or the sound of your pen moving on the page. And again, this is really simple. Anyone can make these marks, and it's about how do we direct our attention in this moment. So we're giving ourselves time and space to just tune into what we're feeling right now.
I love this because I'm finding as I'm like being aware, my breath is actually like becoming longer.
Absolutely, that does often happen. And sometimes I recommend doing this practice for 5 minutes, just first thing in the morning, just making these lines. So mindful art practices, what I love about them is that it's a way of combining both meditation and art. And it's a way to give ourselves space to express ourselves visually, And sometimes we don't have the words, so it's nice to be able to do that visually. So now that we have that first circle complete, we're going to come over to the next circle, and we're just going to make some sort of scribble, any sort of mark that you feel like making right now. We're just going to make a quick mark in that circle and then let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have that mark, you might then start to notice what would be interesting to do with it. So you might want to go back over some of the lines that you made, making those lines darker or deeper. You might want to add additional lines. You might want to connect some of those lines to make a shape. And if you don't know what the impulse is, if you're not sure what it is that you want to do with that, you can continue to make more scribbles. You can have an entire circle of scribbles. You can also go back to that breath, those breath lines that we just did. So this warm-up practice, I love doing also before I'm going to make something else. But for me, sometimes if the page is completely blank, you know, they talk about that blank canvas syndrome, that it can be challenging sometimes just to begin. And so this practice of just making marks, moving quickly from one circle to the next, is a great way to just get into the creative process. We'll spend just a minute or so in each circle.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate to that blank page thing. Often what happens if I'm going to a canvas is I'm taking something like this that I've just been playing with and expanding upon it, because going to the canvas with just blankness it's a little overwhelming.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And then as we're starting to finish that circle, we'll move on to the next one. You might notice some interesting shapes that you like in one of these first two circles. And so that might be harder edges, it might be soft lines or circles. Noticing if there's any shapes that you feel drawn to in those first two circles and beginning there. So perhaps beginning with that shape or mark. And then allowing that to expand into other shapes that you might feel impulses to make. One of my professors when I was in art school used to always say, collaborate with chance. And I love that idea that can we be open to creating and being curious about what wants to come out. So this idea that we don't have to know where our drawing or our practice is going to take us in the moment. So it's another way to just tune in and be present with what is. And then we'll move on to the next circle. So you're kind of starting to get a good feel for this warm up. And then what I would recommend for this circle is perhaps doing something that is the complete opposite of either your last circle or of similar marks you've been making. So what would be the complete opposite of introducing a brand new mark that maybe you haven't explored yet? And it's okay if it's not a complete opposite. That can be a challenge. But just noticing how can you expand those creative muscles to consider something different. And as we're doing this, I always like to encourage tuning back into your breath, noticing the sounds on the page, noticing your feet on the ground. So always coming back, returning back to the present moment. And making any last marks in that circle, we'll move on to the next one here. And I want to just pause for a moment and tune into what you might be feeling right now. So you may want to close your eyes for a moment and even just begin by noticing sensations in your body. And you might notice a certain area of your body that is speaking a little bit louder. So it might be an area of tension or holding. You may notice that if you were to describe that holding or that tension, how would you describe it? It might feel like a rope. It might feel like gravel moving on the ground, anything that you sense into yourself. And we'll move into a more expansive area next, but for now, I encourage you to make marks that might represent that tension that you're feeling in your body. And again, there's no right or wrong way. For me, I notice it feels like a knot, like some sort of thread that's tangled. So that's what's coming up for me when I tune in there.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I felt this knot, but our expression of knots is very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you say that, because what everyone's feeling and how we choose to express that in marks is so very different, even if we have a similar foundation or connection point. I love that you said that. And we're just beginning to kind of flex our muscles around being with what's coming up and then allowing ourselves to make any marks with that. So we'll spend just another moment here on this circle. And then letting that be enough there with that circle, we'll move on to our last one here and tuning back into our body again, speaking of that opposite sensation. So we might have focused on an area of tension or holding, noticing in your body if you have the experience of the opposite of that. So perhaps something that feels more light or expansive, perhaps something that feels soft. So just noticing anywhere in your body where you notice the opposite of that tension. And it can be very small. It could be your fingertip or your toe. And then once you have a sense of that area, noticing what sorts of images come to mind. It can either describe that sensation of lightness, or you might just have other images or shapes that come to mind. And then we'll come back to our circle and make some shapes. And one thing that I have noticed is sometimes it can be easier for us to tap in and tune in to different sensations at different times. So if any of this is challenging, or I think just to honor that, and then just giving yourself permission to make shapes again. Beautiful. So we have these 6 circles now where we've played, we've made some marks, and hopefully stretched some of our creativity and imagination beyond marks that you normally would make. And we're going to start to transition over to a larger piece of paper, or one circle on a piece of paper. So if you want to turn to another page in your journal.
You hear all the noise from my Smash book. I love like all the crinkling.
That's fantastic. And then you can see I have a circle already drawn here, but I'm going to give everyone just a moment to do that. And while you're doing that, I want to mention another really lovely tool that I like to use to check in and tune in, and I call it a 8-step life balance wheel. So this is something we won't dive into right now, but it is included in part of my freebie, and it's a way that you can look at different areas in your life and notice how satisfied or dissatisfied you're feeling with those areas in this moment. And so I love this process and the mindful drawing practice. I often do them daily or weekly as a way to kind of check in with myself and see how I'm feeling, and just to have that reflection back on paper. So I just wanted to mention that as you're drawing your larger circle. And so for our next mindful mandala, we're going to spend a bit more time. We won't move quite as quickly, so we'll have some time to really play with this one. And you might want to look at your other 6 circles that you have and notice, is there a starting point that you feel really drawn to in those other circles? That could give you a place to begin. You also could just begin separately. But you might feel really drawn to one of those shapes or types of marks, and that can be a good, again, starting point so you're not kind of facing that blank canvas. The circle I find also is really helpful as a container because it's already, the page isn't blank, you have something there. So once you want to start playing with one of those shapes, giving yourself permission to make marks. And what I love too is you can always begin again. You can always completely start over. And this practice really is for you. So we're not trying to make art to sell or post on a wall. There's no right or wrong way. And I recommended using a Sharpie because the marks can be a little bit darker and deeper. And also because of the sound. I find markers on journal paper that I can hear the sound stronger. And it helps me to really tune into that connection with the page and with the present moment. But you can absolutely use other materials as well. And as we're making marks here, I shared a little bit about my professor who said collaborating with chance. But I do a lot of work around embracing our inner critics with meditative art practices. And so much of it, I feel like, is giving ourselves permission to trust our intuition of the types of marks we want to make and to trust the process. And what I've noticed for myself and with a lot of my students is that the more we can give ourselves space to create without judgment and to explore, it's almost like tapping into a well of our creativity that we're then able to discover things that maybe we wouldn't have done previously. And it also feels like a more compassionate way to be with ourselves, and we often might enjoy our practice more because we don't have that pressure. We're not creating for someone else or creating to meet someone's standards. So I just really love these practices.
Yeah, that idea is really resonating for me. I've definitely had a whole number of inner critic things come up, and there's like this constant reminder to just be gentle with myself. Right. And
Absolutely.
This is for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's for me and the thousands of people watching the video right now, but it's good practice to let it go.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good word for it, practice, because I think it's part of our human nature to try to compartmentalize and to make judgments. And, you know, it's just part of how our brain is wired. And I think that it is really a practice of constantly returning back to just noticing our breath, just noticing the marks, being with those without judgment, allowing ourselves, giving ourselves permission. And I think that's it's sort of counterintuitive to how our culture is set up also, you know, if you think about like schools and grading systems. So yeah, I think practice is a beautiful word for it. So what I often recommend with this particular practice of making mindful mandalas and the writing afterwards is, if you have your journal, if you just find you have like 5 minutes, even if you're like waiting at a doctor's office and you have your journal with you, or if it's right before you're starting work, it can be a really nice way to just make some marks. Not sure if anyone has heard of Morning Pages by Julia Cameron. Her book, The Artist's Way, is something that has just resonated with me for so long, and I facilitate groups exploring that with people. And one of the most powerful tools that everyone always comes back to is how simple but important it is to give yourself space to write first thing in the morning. So Julia, for anyone watching who's not familiar, Julia Cameron suggests writing 3 pages longhand first thing before you sort of do anything else in your day. And it might be later, you know, if you have family or work, that can be hard. But giving yourself, she says it's a way to siphon off our worries. And so this mindful drawing practice for a long time has been part of my morning pages. So I call them morning musings practices. And instead of it just being writing, it's a way to very quickly make marks as a way to siphon off that worry and just tune in. So I love Julia, and she inspired me in that way. Absolutely. So we'll allow that image to be enough here as it is. You can always come back and do more later. And because it is a circle, you may have already been kind of turning it as you were drawing. You may have not been. So now I encourage you to just kind of turn and find what feels right in this moment. It might change later, but what feels like a good orientation for the picture. I want to just switch back so I can see you and connect with you and connect with everybody watching. I found this process to be really simple and accessible to, in the moment, capture what's happening and then make some sort of additional meaning and sense of sort of the whole world of what's happening with thoughts and emotions. So my intention and hope is that it's a way that people can continually dive back into this really simple process whenever they need it.